Welcome. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second annual RECA Commercial Real Estate Broker and Commercial Property Manager Industry Council Spring Engagement Session. This is your opportunity to hear from the standard-setting body governing your industry sector, to ask them questions and to let them know what you're seeing out there on the ground day today. Firstly, I'll introduce myself. My name is Brian Dewey. I'm the Communications and Connections Manager here at RECA. I'll be your moderator for this engagement session. But before I pass things off to the Industry Council Chair, I just want to briefly cover how the session will unfold. First, the Chair will go through a brief presentation outlining the Industry Council's activities and priorities going forward, followed by an open question and answer session. If you have a question for the Industry Council, you can ask it at any time using the Q&A window. You'll see the button to open the window at the bottom menu of your screen in Zoom. If you have Zoom in full screen mode, you may have to move your cursor to the top of the screen to make a menu pop down. When the presentation has concluded, I will ask the Industry Council Chair your questions. Please note, this is a curated Q&A session. If you have a question that falls under the jurisdiction of another Industry Council or the board, please save that question for the next online engagement session for that Industry Council, or send your questions to that body's email address, which you can find on RECA's website. And also please note that I may not read your question word for word, and if there's more than one question relating to a particular topic, I will ask a question related to the theme of those questions to cover them all. And if your question contains unprofessional language or contains defamatory language or misinformation, please note that I will not read that question. But now that housekeeping is out of the way, and without further ado, I will pass things off to Terry Engen. He is the Chair of the Commercial Real Estate Broker and Commercial Property Manager Industry Council. Welcome, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate the introduction, and good morning and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. As Brian has indicated, this really is an opportunity for us as a council to let you know what we've been doing, but also to get your input as to what you think that we should be doing. So my name is Terry Engen, and as Brian has said, I am the chair of the council. I am a publicly appointed member, and I look forward to today's interaction. That we've been very, I would say, busy at the least, to say that we went through a lot of items since we've last met with you, and we've come to some conclusions that I'm sure that not everybody is happy in some of the directions we've went. But today's an opportunity, and we want to hear from you as to where we should be going in the future. I hope that this is very interactive, and that would be our intent. So that certainly it's the opportunity for you to pose your questions and comments on some of the things that we have been working on and where we are at today. So I guess we can flip it to the next slide, Brian. The agenda going to be at a very high level, things to keep in mind. I will introduce the remainder of the council members. We will go through the education, divestment, and relicensing considerations, the RECA strategic planning and the COMEC, and the Industry Council activity and the upcoming priorities for the council. So when we talk about things to keep in mind, today, as I've said earlier, we're here to hear from you. And at the end of the day, it's just not an overview from me conveying what we have done or what we feel that we should be doing. Council needs to have input from you on really many things, whether they're trends or impacts, or at the end of the cycle, it may be as how, as a self-regulating body, how do you see us, and that being RECA, regulating the licensees? And at the last item, certainly RECA has a public protection mandate, and legitimately that exists to protect all consumers who use the services of real estate, mortgage, property management, or condo management entities. So I don't think that that's a surprise. I think that that's pretty much a given actually in the legislation, and everybody is well aware of that. Next slide. So before I go into that, I want to take the opportunity and introduce the council. And today on the screen, you will see that Ben Van Dyke is with us. Laura Sharon is with us also, and Laura is going to be very quiet today. That she's got a bit of laryngitis, or I'm not even sure it's laryngitis, but she's having a difficult time speaking. So Laura's going to do a lot of listening, and she will input likely into the chat also. So other council members are Brittany Lavender is not with us today. Brittany had a commitment in a meeting in Ottawa, so she's not able to join us. And Sherry Long is not with us to start with, and we are assuming that Sherry will join us throughout the meeting. So next slide. Okay, there we go. So when it comes to the education divestment, I think it's important for you to remember that initially in the legislation, the organization was legislated to be in the divestment of all education practices by November the 30th of 2022. The board, along with all of the industry councils, have taken the step and moved that up 6 months. So we're prepared to say by June the 1st of 2022, we will be divested of all of the education that we have under our umbrella. At the present time, we're pretty comfortable that we have several course providers, including universities, schools of business. There's been lots of interest in providing these courses, even though we are one of the smaller councils on the commercial side. There's been a lot of interest in providing at this point. And I can tell you that, you know, some of them certainly are the Haskayne School of Business, the Sauder School of Business at UBC is developing right now. So we feel very comfortable that we are moving to the right providers and that they will be in place. We cross our fingers. The relicensing options are, we are still considering as a council how we're going to handle this. And at the end of the day, we will keep everyone apprised of the relicensing. We know that it's a part and parcel of the mandate that we have. We just have not got to the point of having fulsome discussions yet on how that rolls out and when it rolls out. I think later in the presentation, we'll talk 22, 23, you know, out into 23 is when it would start. And I'll speak to that later. We know that the practical education portion of the commercial education platform is underway. It's being developed, and certainly we're comfortable that it will be available by June the 1st, and we'll go from there. Next slide. So strategic planning, we've been, the board itself, their fiduciary duty of the board is that they are responsible for the strategic direction for RECA. In saying that, the commercial council has been very involved with this process and was consulted heavily, as the slide says. Couple of things that certainly you know, that we had put forward and we talked about strategically was consistency, reducing the red tape, the collaboration with other councils. A huge part was stakeholder engagement, and certainly fiscal responsibility. And that was the inputs that we had spoke of. And I think when you see the slides coming up, that you'll see that the planning exercise that is being proposed kind of covers a lot of that off. The feedback was provided to all stakeholders in early 2021, and the priorities are there. And right now we're out for consultation again. And the deadline is coming up to June the 9th for feedback on this plan. And we would ask that you please take some time to review it and provide your input. That nobody is naive enough to think that that we perhaps haven't forgot something or that we've missed the mark on something. And that's why it's important for you to input into this. I know that the priorities themselves were they were initially put out there, and certainly the element of another round of engagement was deemed to be appropriate. So that's why we're there now. Very much so that you have the opportunity as licensees to input into this process. Next slide. So there you see the priorities that have been developed at this point. When we go to the regulatory excellence, you will see the comprehensive rules review. The licensing really is in the domain by the legislative framework of the Act, in the domain under the bylaws of the council. So there's the entities that we will certainly be focusing on. And we will be going out to you as the licensees on these individually when we start work on them, as for your input again. And we would ask that once again you take the time and provide us your input into these two areas that are solely in our bailiwick. I can tell you that the licensing framework, when we look at it to reflect exactly what the current Real Estate Act says, we recognize that that it's become very complicated, and our council has had initial discussions on how complicated it is, and even to the point of having multiple licenses and who's in the business, who is not. How does it reflect in the commercial side versus the other areas of real estate? So our goal is to look at options, and we've had some very preliminary discussions on options that may look in individual licensing in the commercial world, and whether that will be a solution. We really haven't went down that road yet to determine if it's the right one. But we do recognize that the licensing framework as of today, we recognize that I would suggest through some very good comments by our elected people on the council who are actual licensees, knowing full well how complicated this has been, and their comments have been invaluable in this. So truly, it's good to have them sitting at our table, explaining the ins and outs of getting to a system that is better. So, Brian, next slide. So some of the things that we've been doing in 21-22, we have went through a pretty extensive review in the 21 start of the organization on the election bylaws and the election eligibility. Was a pretty big endeavor, I will say that to you. And as of November of 21, we did come with a little bit of a new direction, and doesn't mean that we're solid on that. We know that elections are coming up again, and we will be going through the process to review those bylaws and the eligibility on elections, and as where we sit as a council coming up into the next cycle. The education divestment has taken an awful lot of our time. We've spent meeting after meeting going through a lot of issues with that divestment and how it's going to affect licensees. It's been an endeavor, likely none other than we've tackled at this point. You know, we've went through multiple consultations on it throughout the summer and fall of 21. Think that we came through a framework for the licensing classes that we have. We've come through the competency profiles. I want to make sure that you, the licensees, understand that although that we have said that we're in a position right now where we're moving forward with it, with a divestment, and that does not mean in any shape or form that we are in a position where we're guaranteeing you that everything we've done is right. And we know very well that this is very much a starting point. We've got checks and balances on things such as competencies, and we've got checks and balances on providers. And, you know, until we start working with it, only time will tell as to what the potential changes we will have to make in the future. And we're not naive enough to make the statement to you that oh, we've got it perfect because we spent a lot of time on it. No, we're very comfortable in saying if it needs to be changed, we're prepared to change it. As anything with a regulator, we've spent time certainly with disciplinary activity, and that's part of the business as the regulator and where we are at under the Act, the Real Estate Act, and our role in that. And I know that the advertising changes that were proposed in previous years, we want to make it very clear that we have not made any movement to revisit that. They were proposed back in 18, and we heard very clearly from the licensees that they were not in favor of this. So it's been put on a back burner, and although it took quite a bit of our time and we went through a pretty extensive exercise, we still feel very comfortable that things are fine right now, and the proposed changes were not in the best interest of the licensees, and we were not prepared to go there. Next slide. So the immediate priorities, I think that you know, the number one on the list is the ongoing stakeholder engagement, and that comes in the three areas: strategic planning, the rules review, the licensing framework. The key to us is that the stakeholder engagement. It is very important for us to have you input into these discussions. As I've said earlier on, the consultation is now, you know, it's ongoing in the strategic planning cycle, and those comments have to be back in by June the 9th. The rules review is going to be a pretty extensive exercise coming up for this next cycle. And, you know, it hasn't, I think that I speak to it a little later, that it hasn't been done for a while, but it's going to be important to us. And the licensing framework is something that we need to have in place, and we will have it in place, but it is also a matter of making it work. The relicensing education, we will tackle that, and I've said to you that it's quite preliminary right now. We will start having the discussions, and it will be a work in progress, and we know that that will not take place out until 2023, and whatever that looks like, it may come to the point in this one where we may actually, on the relicensing, to start with, have to look at a single provider to make it work. But we have not had those discussions and have not actually had that interest yet come in, but that may be one option for us to look at. Okay, next slide. So the next one that is an immediate priority, as I keep continuously talking about, that the divestment of the education, and we are moving on it as we speak, and things are happening. So we feel very comfortable. We're well underway on this one. Consultation with the board on industry council election bylaws and the eligibility of election. We talked about that. We will be in that mode, and we're looking forward to that. Not to say that we're going to make any changes, but we will do the review again to make sure that we were right on that. The stakeholder engagement, very important to us. We want to hear from you. Red tape reduction. And, you know, we heard very clearly from the government of Alberta that we were likely not going to be an agency, that would be a mandate from the government. But as a council, and I can tell you as an organization, that every council, along with the board, felt that this was likely a #1 priority, was to review the situations that we find ourselves in now, whether it be policy, bylaws, everything else that we do, and what can be eliminated. And I can tell you that, you know, from our council's perspective, this will likely be our #1 priority, is that we feel very strongly about that perhaps we're over-regulated, and let's simplify things and get to the point where we can still be the protectors of the consumer and the public, but do it in a more reasonable way. And a priority for us also is that we've been very clear as a council, and I would speak, I think, certainly from the perspective of the other councils, that we cannot work in silos. And you know, it appears as though that's a very easy thing to do. That you know, you can run off on a tangent even from the commercial side and do our own thing, then only to realize that we're conflicting with the other councils and perhaps with the board. And with our struggle, with our structure of how we operate under self-regulation, it's become very clear that you know, we have the opportunity to work as individuals under the Act. And I say as individuals, I speak of councils, but that likely is not in our best interest. And I think that we're comfortable in saying that, and we will continue to collaborate with the other councils. And the commonality that we have, we will strengthen that. And the individualism that we have, we'll identify it and we'll make it work within our individual council also. Next slide. Okay, so I think we're to the point of the Q&A. So Brian, I apologize. I should have went back to, I think we started in the Q&A. There is some questions there, but I'm maybe going to turn it over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Terry. That was excellent. We have a couple of questions so far in the queue here. The first one has to do with the not the relicensing, but with the education divestment, and that's if someone applies, you know, to take education prior to the divestment date. So that's, you know, in the next 2 weeks or so here. Will they be in RECA's program until they finish, or do they have to switch to a third-party provider?
And Brian, I'm going to actually, because Charles is not here, and I know we've had that discussion, and we are down to this this funny period of time, and I think we were a little bit in limbo with that one. Can you provide some insight as to the discussions that have went on with the providers? Because I know that we have secured providers, and I'm not sure those discussions of this period of time where we're in an interim, what our position is going to be.
I can provide a little insight. So we are still enrolling in RECA courses since we have not reached the divestment date. So if someone enrolls up until May 24th, I believe, they can finish the RECA course. They have until that like hard legislated divestment date to complete it, I believe, until that November 30th, 2022 date, because we're not going to make them switch partway through if they're trying to join. So they will finish out the RECA program up until November 30th, but you know, as long as they enroll prior to May 24th. But until we here officially and have course providers recognized by yourselves on the industry council and in the other sectors until those are set and in place and everything's approved, and that'll happen, hopefully in the next 2 weeks here. We can't really, as you said, can't really speak to what's going to happen with those course providers.
Yeah, and I think when I said we're a little bit in limbo because we know that we have it organized, but the actual kickoff date, and the closer we get to that date, the more awkward it's going to be. That I would suggest that we're talking the 24th now. We get a week later than that, and those will be the few days where we'll really be in a bit of a crunch situation to say, yes, the provider is up and running, and no, you will move to that provider area, or no, you will stay in the RECA model. Okay, I'm also going to say that I'm going to look to Ben also for some of these questions. That Ben will provide some insight on some of them. So Ben and I will kind of tag team on some of these with Brian, and Laura may provide some insight into the chat. And as I've said, she's not going to speak too much. So next question, Brian.
Sure. So the next question has to do with the standards to get in the industry. So it says many have said it's too easy to obtain a real estate license. Are the entry requirements being considered with the goal of improving professionalism and having higher competencies in the industry? Is the industry council considering that?
That's a very good question. And I will tell you that when we looked at standards and we looked at competencies, one of the criticisms that came back to us is that we were perhaps a little too strict and that we were asking for maybe a little too much. I hope that we can find our way with those competencies. And, I'm going to look to Ben because I know that Ben had some comments on this of elevating the standards to a point that we were not seen as being lowballing it. So, I wanted to preface my comments by saying, before I turn it to Ben, that we're kind of in a bad situation where some think we went too far, others are of the opinion that we have not went far enough. Ben, do you want to comment on this one too?
Yeah, I think the overall education part of it is going to be more industry specific, and I think we all can benefit from more experience, like currently on the council, and that direction can be in the education process. Yield much better results, and that's the same with the other councils. I think it's going to be a lot more industry directed, so that things like what are changing in the industry can be also brought the right way to the course, so the course will be changing ongoing, I assume.
Okay. Hopefully that answered your question. I can tell you that as far as we're concerned, under the area that you have spoken about when it comes to competencies and how you talk about professionalism, it is on our agendas every meeting that we have. How do we guarantee professionalism, and do we do it through that education platform, competencies, et cetera, et cetera? So, okay,
Absolutely.
Next question.
So this one you covered a bit earlier in the presentation, but maybe they missed that, and maybe a good idea to go over it quickly again is, who are the education providers who have expressed interest?
So right now we have the two that are there is the Haskayne School of Business and the Sauder School of Business out of UBC are the two at the present time that are, and Brian, you can likely allude a little bit to this, but my understanding is they're well underway in the creation of the documents and the development of the curriculum. So, we're pretty comfortable that they've been given the nod to continue on, and we await to see if it's actually stood up on that particular date.
Yeah, just to be clear, neither of those have been recognized officially by the industry council yet. That's an official process, but
Yeah.
they have, expressed interest in doing this along, months and months and months ago, and have been involved in the process. And so they're two that we look forward to having, hopefully on June 1st.
Yeah. So they have been. We will go through a process, as Brian has indicated, to say yes, they've met all of the criteria, but the initial concept certainly has been given a nod to those two providers.
Absolutely.
Okay.
The next question I'll just cover quickly. They asked, will there be a recording of today's meeting available? The answer is yes. It will be on RECA's website and in the Industry Council's webpage in our website, and it will be on our YouTube channel either later today or tomorrow at the latest. Next question about the licensing framework. Do you see area-specific licensing? Example, office, condo versus warehouse versus retail, restaurant versus gas station?
Another very interesting question, because I know in our initial discussions, we have not gone into that type of minutia yet on that detail. We've talked some broader sectors of individual licensing, and some of that was to get away from the multiple, what we would say in the council would be that the complicated versions of what the licensing looks like, and to really identify it as single. And I hope that I'm making those comments appropriate, where that it becomes, that you back a single license and you all know what it means. To get into the detail that you've asked about, we have not had those discussions. Although, it's a good comment, and we're going to note that, because when we go down that road of having these discussions, we need to have that input as to how much detail do we go into when we're talking about licensing.
Absolutely. And yeah, and like you said, when you go down that road, you will be asking stakeholders their thoughts.
Yeah.
Okay. This question about access, brokers having access to education material from new providers so they know what their new agents will be taught. I'm not sure I have an answer for that today. I don't know if you do, Terry, but that's one maybe we can reach out for afterwards.
Yeah, I think that's one that we will have to reach out afterwards. And I think in all fairness, the licensees are likely aware that certainly the broker meetings are going on and are scheduled as we speak. Northern Alberta was yesterday. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it was yesterday. And the Southern Alberta one, I think, is on the 24th. So we will be having some input back from those meetings also. But yeah, we haven't had that discussion yet as to that interfacing between actual brokers and the service providers. So we'll need to get back on that question.
Another education divestment question. It speaks to perhaps what kind of requirements the industry council can place on course providers and what type of courses they provide. Because they're asking if we can include a practicum part of a course, a requirement for a practicum and to be in a course. Can the industry council ask the providers to include something like that?
I think on the from the development side of the curriculum, and when we provided the overarching guidance as to how the curriculum would be developed, I think that the opportunity still avails to that. That we've heard very clearly, and the practicum is a huge issue, certainly from the broker's side. We've heard that in the meetings that we've had up till this point, and I'm sure that we will continue to hear that, likely even yesterday, and again, I'm sure on the 24th, as to the practicum of licensing. Is there the availability of that? I would suggest that some of the brokers have been very clear that that they provide that themselves and would see it as redundant. We took that into consideration. Some of the associations are saying that, whether it be whatever the associations are, the multitude of them are saying, well, we provide some of those services to our licensees right now on a practicum side. We have programs that look at that. Does it mean that we shouldn't do it? No, I think that we would be likely foolhardy if we didn't go down that road of looking at, is it necessary for number one, and is it practical? And I think that we will have those discussions as we go through the process. And you're absolutely right that we have the mechanism, and part of your question to begin with was on the service providers. As the regulator, we have the mechanism to actually provide the opportunity for the service providers to go into depth on a lot of these questions. So, and the check and balance that we talk about has been very clear on, for instance, once a curriculum has been there and the service provider is going through it, how do we determine success, for instance? And that's been a huge discussion that we've had. One of the elements, the simplification of it could be, we've got too many rewrites on exams. They're not providing enough information when the writing is coming into RECA. There's many avenues that we have that only time will tell, unfortunately, whether the service provider is doing their job or not. But we do have the checks and balances in place to be able to do that.
And another education question. It's so basically, is it with divestment of education, are these just different providers providing the same old course, or are these completely new courses?
My take on this is that you will find that they're complete new courses. There will be a lot of standards that will be covered, but I would suggest there's a lot of things that are in there that have been tailor-made to today's societal pressure and what the expectations are. Brian, you will likely know in detail, certainly from the past, what, there are certain things that have to be covered off, but I don't think that there was a starting point just to say, here's the course that we had at RECA, we're just going to shove that over. This was a pretty detailed process and a pretty detailed restructure of curriculum development. So, there was a lengthy process to develop these curriculums, and I would say there could be some overlap, absolutely, but there will be a lot of new content also.
Yeah, I think you put it pretty well. Yeah. Another question coming in on the chat here. So we've talked a lot about divestment, and this is for people entering the industry, but how does divestment affect the current licensing?
Well, I would suggest that the current licensing, the divestment is going to be the same type of a scenario, that there will be an element when we get into what relicensing means, that there will likely be, as I said earlier, to start with, one of the simplified models may be that there's one service provider on relicensing, and whether that be a challenge or whether it be having to go through or the new curriculum. We haven't had those discussions yet, and I'm not sure if I'm hitting this one on the mark, Brian, but I think that the question is a good one, but I think that it's stay tuned, because I think that we're really trying to determine what that's going to look like in 2023 for the existing licensees and not the new coming in.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. And then also that, with what training do these new people coming in have? So they're coming and joining your brokerage as colleagues, and they're the people you deal with on the other side of the negotiating table. What are they learning? And with divestment and going through all the competencies and everything like that and getting your feedback on the competencies, you've given us feedback on what those competencies should be and what those new people will be learning out there. And that's an ongoing process, like you said. So those competencies could change if we get like, I think that's set that we'll review them periodically and make sure that that's up to date and is what's actually needed to have competent professionals out there.
Yeah.
These will be the people that will be your future colleagues coming in. So I think it affects all licensees that way.
Yeah, and I think, and that's a very good point, because I think when I talked about checks and balances, that they're, what deems to be success is pretty much is a well-balanced scenario of how it's determining the success. And, at the end of the day, one of the elements is the curriculum missing the mark. And, not to say that the service providers are not providing exactly what the curriculum says, but maybe the curriculum is not hitting the mark. And that will be back to RECA then to say, we need to do some changes on what the curriculum looks like. So, it is a kind of a trial and error. There's no doubt about it. I will openly admit that. But I think that many of you will recognize in any of the development of any new curriculum, there's going to be that process of that question in the back of your mind. Did you get it right? And how do you determine whether you got it right based on success?
Absolutely. Another question about relicensing education. So you probably haven't considered this at this point, but you can just confirm for me, but they're wondering if the relicensing educations will drill down into certain areas of commercial real estate or be more broad and cover all of commercial real estate. So like you have a relicensing on industrial versus business versus retail.
Yeah, and we have not had those discussions yet, but we're going to note them, because it comes back to the earlier question about how much detail do you go into on that licensing scenario, and what does that license look like? And if it's the relicensing, I would suggest might be more important than the look that we're going to look at it from the standpoint of, do you actually identify more scenarios where that license stands? But at this point, we haven't had those discussions, and we know that we're under the gun time-wise, and we know that relicensing model, like I've said, will be 2023. So we have to be prepared and have a structure in place with what the expectations will be of that structure.
Great. And along a similar vein and through the vein of a few questions so far, a comment up to you guys is, a consideration of breaking out what they're calling more corporate real estate that deals with office, industrial, retail leasing, versus the program or license for reflective of residential and small business properties. This person's just wondering if that would be a way that the industry council might break up the education or the licensing.
I think it's a good note for us to take into consideration when we have those discussions. And I know Ben has certainly been one that has put forward the ideas of there are certain things that you can be expected to do and that you should be licensed in. And I'm going to flip it to Ben to make that comment, because he's brought that to the table many times. And I think it'll be important, those comments, when we get to the relicensing of how that looks on different parts of the industry. So Ben, I think this is kind of one of your pet peeves, if nothing else. So I'll maybe get you to speak to this one, because I think it's very important to you.
Yeah, for sure. Like there's tremendous difference between the corporate sector, like in the small business sector, and in overall, we need more education, like for practitioners in each sector. And that could be done with relicensing or mandatory courses, and so that we stay more up to date. Like not everything is applicable to one industry. So I think it's very important, like that we get the education, what is needed for all licensees.
Yeah. So you can tell by Ben's comments that certainly it'll be a big part of our discussion is to finding particular models that are going to work for particular sectors. I think at the end of the day, that's a fair statement. I would assume that we will go down that road and in collaboration with the other councils also in the commonalities, but important for us, I think, as a council to go and have those discussions.
Great. And another question related to education as well, but I think I'll answer it if that's all right with you, Mr. Chair. The question is, with the education, how different is it between providers? Each provider just has to meet the course and course provider requirements that we set out. And those have some basic things that they have to have in their course, and they have to follow the competencies that the industry council has approved. But other than that, how they do the course and what price they make the course, how long they make the course, that's entirely up to them. We've had this third-party provider model in place for condominium management for several months now. And what we do is we have all the providers that are recognized by the industry council available on our webpage, and then you go to theirs to enroll and everything, but we have them listed, which ones are recognized. And then what you would notice is that different ones have, could be half the price and could be half the hours required to do the course, but maybe that won't be as good of a course. You don't know. But what we do on our page and what we will do for commercial courses as well is we put the exam pass rate for people who took a particular course, and we have that listed so that people can make an informed judgment on which provider they want to go with. So if one has half the price and half the time, maybe their exam pass rate is a little lower or not, but maybe it is, and you can make the decision, I'll take this other course that has the higher rate, even though it's a little more expensive, but that'd be entirely up to the person entering the course. So the courses, how they operate, how they create the course, all that will be entirely different between the providers. Next question. Let's see what comes in here. This person disagrees with splitting out the commercial license. Just so you know, there are different areas and different opinions on this one. Let's see. So the industry council did the competencies for the commercial real estate associate and the commercial broker, but also you did property manager competencies as well, because that's commercial property managers are part of your scope. But what knowledge does this industry council have of the curriculums that were offered in the other sectors, say the residential sector? And do the industry councils work together to make sure that they all sort of work together and make sense?
The simple answer is yes. We had the opportunity to sit as a group and look at the commonalities of what the curriculums would look like. The specifics of what the others did after the fact of moving beyond the commonalities, we did not get involved with. The key was certainly from the chair's perspective and from the board, was to make sure that all of our councils had the opportunity to input into what they felt was the commonalities and the basic curriculum structure. The individualism of the councils, where on the residential real estate, for instance, there was things that really did not pertain to the commercial side, or and therefore were we as much concerned? No, we weren't. We had the opportunity, to go through them, and our council members did keep up to date on reviewing what the other councils were doing. But specifically, once it was involved with them, we didn't spend a lot of time in diving in to their business from that angle.
Great. So exams, are exams reviewed and approved by RECA, or are they the sole purview of the providers?
No, so the exams will still be in RECA's bailiwick. And that's going to be one of the keys, is that The actual exam will be a determination of the success rate of the provider. And they know what those exams look like. And we've went through and, we've talked about, retaking of exams and, to begin with as to determine, where the potential flaws are in the system. And we've had some pretty good input back on those exams saying, well, it should be pretty simple. And then we've had some that are saying, well, geez, that's complicated. How come we may have a failure rate of too high in one particular area? And I think it was important, even when we were developing and we're looking at the curriculum development, when, I think we as a council were very upfront in saying, we recognize that perhaps, to be licensed, you're going to have a little bit of knowledge of everything, whether you like it or not, whether you're going to be a licensee, you're going to be a little bit of a lawyer, you're going to be a little bit of a land developer, you're going to be a little bit of a lot of things. And we wanted to make sure that the success related to the exam stayed in the hands of RECA, and it was going to be a good tool to make sure that the system was working.
Great. I think that's it for questions, unless one more pops in the next few seconds. Seeing nothing. We're running close to our time anyways, so I'll leave the last word for you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Brian. And I want to thank the council members that were on, and I truly want to thank everyone who's taken the time this morning to join us. We do have some comments that have come into the chat, and we will be reviewing those as a council and along with the staff. And there's some good opinions in there, so we want to go into depth in what some of those opinions are in the chat. Some good areas for us to focus on. So I want to thank you for taking the time. It's been important for us. I should have began today by saying that we were hopeful that this would be an in-person meeting, and before you were all let into the meeting, certainly the council had the opportunity to speak a little bit amongst ourselves. And although we did have some people who were willing to come into a public meeting, we'll have to review that too. And, I think there's still a little apprehension of perhaps some apprehension of getting a couple hundred people into a room with COVID still lurking. And as Ben has indicated, there's a little apprehension about people moving away from work. And you as licensees are all very busy right now, and we recognize that. And we talked about, that we're going to have to evaluate in the future of, these virtual meetings, although we kind of shrugged our shoulders and said they're really not the best. At the end of the day, for you as licensees, they may be the best venue to get your input into these types of meetings. So we will evaluate that. And, I'd love to be able to meet a bunch of you in person in a venue. And I'm sure that I speak on behalf of my council colleagues that that's their thought also. But for today, we appreciate you taking the time in a very busy life. And we will take all of your comments and into consideration, and your questions, and where we need to provide more clarity, we are prepared to do that. So Laura, I see his hand is up, so maybe Laura is going to take a shot at speaking. Laura?
No, sorry, technical difficulties. I was just going to send a quick chat and just thank everybody for participating and say good afternoon. So. Okay,
thank you, Laura. Okay, I think, Brian, that likely concludes then. I thank you once again to everyone for participating. It's been great. The questions have been great, and yeah, we will take everything into consideration. So thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.